According to the Chinese military, China and India engaged in a quote-unquote serious physical clash on Monday evening along the border in the Gaowen Valley. Despite the clashes, China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said on Wednesday that the two sides agreed to work out the problems through dialogue. What's behind this fatal skirmish and where are things heading? I'm joined in Beijing by Victor Gao, professor at Suzhou University, and later from New Delhi via Skype, Swaran Singh, chairman of the Center of International Politics at Jawaharlal Nehru University, and also in Beijing, later on by phone, Einar Tengen, current affairs commentator. Victor, let me start with you. Beijing described the conflict as, quote-unquote, a serious physical clash at the border, but Beijing stopped short of giving casualty numbers. China said India seriously violated the consensus reached by the two sides, and India crossed the border into the Chinese territory twice. That's why the fatal clash. Take a listen at what the Chinese Foreign Ministry had just said.
Both sides are having close communication with each other on resolving the relevant matter in the Gaowen Valley border area through diplomatic and military channels. The facts of the matter are very clear. This incident happened on the Chinese side of the line of actual control, and China is not to blame for this.
Victor, what do you make of the deadly confrontation? Which side is to blame?
Well, first of all, it is very unfortunate that the border clash happened at this particular time. I think the timing is very, very bad for both China and India. Neither China nor India want to have escalation of tension along their very long and arduous mountainous borders. Now, secondly, it is fortunate that the border physical confrontation did not involve any firing of any guns. And it's unfortunate that casualties were sustained by India's side, according to India report. And I would not be surprised if there are also casualties on the Chinese side. It is a pity that such casualties happened. And I would say we mourn the deaths of either Chinese soldiers or the Indian soldiers. And I hope this will not happen again, because the long border, which is disputed, should be a border or line of actual control of peace and stability. And China and India have much, much more important interests to pursue, rather than, for example, engaging each other in conflict along their very long, arduous border or line of actual control. Therefore, I think eventually both China and India should have enough sanity and wisdom to bring this to de-escalation, and the Chinese people and the Indian people will enjoy peace and stability along their very, very long and arduous border or line of actual control.
Well, Victor, we've just heard from China's foreign ministry saying that the two sides agreed to work out their problems through dialogue and negotiation. China's State Councilor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi also talked to his Indian counterpart. How hopeful are you that this will be just a minor skirmish instead of a wider conflict?
Absolutely. I have full confidence in China and India managing to get along with each other as far as their border or line of actual control is concerned. Why? Because for China, with a population of 1.4 billion people, and India with a population of 1.3 billion people, to get along with each other is the megatrend and is the only viable option for these two great nations and two great countries to pursue. Any provocation by either side against the other side, any threat to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the other side will backfire and will become very, very counterproductive. And I hope neither China nor India will be instigated by any foreign forces, which may actually enjoy China and India getting to each other's jugular. And they will have minimum consequences for these countries, but for China and India, the consequences will be huge. So de-escalation is the only viable option for China and India along their long and arduous border or line of actual control.
Right, Victor, this is the first reported incident of deadly clash in a long time, since the 1970s. That was over 40 years ago. There were reports of minor skirmishes, but things have been largely under control. How come the two sides, the two militaries, chose to engage this time around at this point?
Well, first of all, it is very fortunate that neither China nor India over the past several decades have resorted to any firing of guns against each other. And while border clashes have happened over the decades, they are, relatively speaking, minor incidents. This time, we do witness deaths on either the Indian side or both the Indian side and the Chinese side, which is very, very unfortunate. And this calls for both countries to exercise maximum restraint, to exercise a lot of control of their temper, of their emotion, of their armed forces, and avoid any escalation of tensions. And this is, as I mentioned, a must. It is a must for China, it is a must for India, because both India and China have much, much more important strategic goals to pursue. Rather than getting at each other's jugular, rather than degenerating into an armed conflict which will really spell peril for both the Indian people and the Chinese people.
Right. Professor Swaran Singh in India, I want to get your sense of what happened. Can you give us the Indian side of the story? What happened? What do we know about the casualties so far?
As you know, the Indian government has already given the figure, saying that one colonel and 19 soldiers have been martyred in this incident. I also noticed that this is hardly a news in Chinese media, and I am not sure if Chinese government has as yet issued any figures of losses on their side. Therefore, we are only looking at various, reports about it, saying that between 45 to 50 Chinese soldiers were also hurt, and some of them may have been killed. But I understand that there is no authoritative figure as yet that the Chinese have given. But I am happy that both sides are keeping things under control, both at the border and at various levels, including foreign ministers have spoken to each other. And I assume that they will try to minimize the damage. But I understand this is part of repeated encounters that have happened in recent past, that the tempers have gone so bad that even if we have the protocols on the ground, we have all kinds of mechanisms of border meetings, consultative mechanisms, the kind of anger that has kind of resulted from these repeated encounters has for the first time done such a tragic incident on the border. It is really upsetting the whole country. India is really seeing enormous anger. Newspapers are full of this news. The government has really been also talking about it. So I think it's a major issue as far as India is concerned. But we are still awaiting the Chinese side to give their version of what happened.
Well, Swaran, what have you heard about what New Delhi wants to do? How does New Delhi want to resolve this situation? What have you heard from the Indian military, its foreign ministry? Because we know that India's foreign minister just talked over the phone with China's state councillor and foreign minister.
Yes. Indeed, India has maintained over the last 6 weeks, when this tension was building up on the eastern sector particularly, that India wanted to make sure that armed forces on the ground only follow a clear instruction given by the political leadership of keeping strength but keeping restraint all the time. And I think that message was very clear. And we noticed that even now the effort is to make sure that disengagement happens on the ground. Forces go back to where they were in April, since when this kind of tension has been building on the border. And of course, as you mentioned, the foreign ministers have spoken to each other. So definitely the mechanisms which are meant to pacify such situations have become active. India has been saying that from the very beginning. But what I'm underlining is that the frequency of these encounters on the border and the fact that Chinese over years have successfully built enormous infrastructure on their side, and they can bring forward enormous amount of force projection to the line of actual control much faster. And I think that has really raised the tempos on the border, and I think that's something we need to really address. That the past mechanisms are perhaps not very effective in dealing with the anger now on the border.
Right. You know, many people talk about the role of America. You know, the current U.S. administration has been actively promoting what it calls a Indo-Pacific strategy, forging closer strategic and military ties with India. So this question really goes to both of you. I want both of you to respond to this. Victor, why don't I start with you? Do you think America's Indo-Pacific strategy played a role and emboldened India to some extent to confront Beijing this time around?
Well, I do see dark forces coming out of Washington in the recent round of tensions being built up along China-Indian border. Why? Because it is very apparent that the United States government is pursuing an anti-China policy, and it is trying to do whatever it can to further raise the tension and confrontation with China. And India falls very naturally in its calculation against China. But I would say the Chinese people as well as the Indian people, both very, very long ancient civilizations, will have enough wisdom not to be used as a pawn by any large power outside of this region to confronting each other, because they will know sooner or later, and sooner the better, that confronting each other to resort to more confrontation and even armed conflict against each other is a very, very bad strategy. And therefore, these ulterior motivations try to put more tension in between China and India will eventually fail. Why? Because I have full confidence in the Chinese people and in the Indian people of rising above such provocations by third-party countries outside of this region. The Chinese people and the Indian people will eventually build friendship for the long term.
Swaran, I'm sorry, but we have about 1 minute to go. Do you want to add to what Victor had just said? What do you think?
Yes, what makes it easy is that I'm in full agreement with my senior colleague, Victor Kao. What he has said is perfectly on the spot. But let me just add, since you said I have a minute, it's not easy for the United States to influence India's policy. India is too large and too sort of self-respecting nation to follow something that the United States would like India to do. India follows its own national interests. And since you mentioned Indo-Pacific, I'm sure your viewers are fully aware how from 2018 speech of Indian Prime Minister at Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, India has repeatedly said India wants to have China as part of the Indo-Pacific discussion. And we have made sure that the quadrilateral security dialogue should not become militarized, should not become exclusive club of few nations. Indeed, India has made sure that Indo-Pacific becomes one of the items on China-India annual maritime dialogue. So India has really kept its calm and its eye on the ball in that sense to make sure that we are able to balance between various relationships. You can notice how India has behaved recently, even on issue of COVID-19, etc. India takes its own decisions independently, which is part of Indian civilizational DNA. So I don't think one should in China read what India is saying or doing as part of driven by United States. So India values its relationship
well, I guess,
with both United
on this
States
point,
and China.
The two gentlemen, you will have to agree to disagree. Swaran, I'm sorry, that's all the time we have. I want to thank you so very much, and also Victor Gao in Beijing. Thanks so much.